In the year 113 AD, Rome stood at the peak of its power, with Emperor Trajan ruling an empire of approximately 5 million square kilometers and governing more than 60 million people, nearly 1/4 of the world's population at the time. The borders of the empire stretched from Britannia in the northwest to the Euphrates River in the east. More than 30 legions, supported by an equal number of auxiliary units, enforced Roman authority across this vast territory. The city of Rome itself approached 1 million inhabitants. Wealth poured into the city from every corner of the known world, feeding monuments, armies, and the endless appetite of the capital. For those who lived within its walls, Rome felt eternal, a force of order in a world that knew only Rome's shadow. The glorious Emperor Trajan had just finished his latest project, Trajan's Column. Rising like a frozen pillar of time in the heart of the Forum of Trajan, the monument was both history and propaganda, a story told not in words but in images that climbed toward the sky. Its marble surface was wrapped in a spiraling band of reliefs that unfolded like a scroll, guiding the eye upward through war, discipline, and victory, depicting the two Dacian wars as a continuous visual narrative carved in stone. Inside runs a narrow spiral staircase, carved directly into the marble core of the monument. The staircase leads to the top platform, which supports a golden statue of Trajan himself. The column's pedestal would be the place where Trajan's ashes would be sealed in a golden urn after his death, 4 years later. The column was constructed shortly after Trajan's triumph over Dacia, a massive spectacle that filled Rome with processions, spoils of war, and prisoners from the conquered lands. During Roman triumphs, a slave stood behind the victorious emperor in his chariot, whispering, "Memento mori," remember, you are mortal, to remind the most powerful man on earth that even at the height of glory, he was still only human. Hundreds of years in the past, during the late Republic, triumphant generals painted their faces red to resemble Jupiter, symbolizing that they temporarily embodied the god during the procession. But by the time of Trajan, this ancient ritual had faded, as Rome moved away from archaic religious symbolism and toward a more political and imperial form of power display. Gold and silver from the Dacian mines flowed into the city, funding monuments that reshaped the very heart of Rome. After the triumph faded and the last echoes of celebration disappeared from the streets, the people of Rome were given another gift to seal their loyalty and awe: the games. To honor his victory in Dacia, Trajan sponsored gladiatorial combats that lasted for 122 days, involving around 10,000 gladiators and the slaughter of more than 11,000 animals. The Colosseum and other arenas were filled daily with crowds watching duels, executions, and exotic beasts brought from every corner of the empire. These games were not just entertainment, but a political message, showing that the emperor had limitless wealth, power, and control over life and death. For the Roman people, it was a festival of blood and spectacle that confirmed Trajan as the greatest ruler of his age. The Colosseum, completed in 80 AD under Titus and now fully integrated into Roman life, became the stage on which imperial power was performed for the masses. These spectacles were funded by the state and by emperors seeking to secure popularity through lavish gladiator battles, executions, and even naval battles, in which the entire arena was filled with water. The amphitheater itself was a triumph of engineering and social order. Seating was strictly divided by class, with senators closest to the arena and women and the poor pushed to the upper tiers. Beneath the wooden floor lay the hypogeum, a complex system of corridors, cages, lifts, and trap doors that allowed animals and fighters to appear suddenly in the sand. This machinery transformed the arena into a theater of controlled chaos, where danger seemed spontaneous but was meticulously planned. The gladiators themselves were professionals, trained in state-run or private schools called ludi. They learned specific fighting styles, each with its own armor, weapons, and tactics, turning combat into a form of disciplined performance rather than random slaughter. Many were slaves, but some were free men who signed contracts for fame, money, and the chance to rise above their status. Victorious fighters became celebrities, often earning prize money and salaries that could reach several thousand sesterces per year, sums high enough to buy freedom, property, and a level of social status impossible for most ordinary Romans. Death was common, but not guaranteed, as trained fighters were expensive and often spared. But in 113 AD, the Colosseum was not the only marvel of entertainment. South of the Palatine Hill stretched the Circus Maximus, the largest stadium ever built in the ancient world, a vast open arena capable of holding more than 250,000 spectators. Unlike the Colosseum's vertical walls, the circus spread wide and long, measuring over 600 meters in length, built for speed, noise, and mass excitement. Here, chariot racing was not just a sport, but an obsession that divided the city into factions of color, loyalty, and fury. 4 main teams, the blues, greens, reds, and whites, dominated the races, each with its own supporters who treated victory as a matter of identity. Charioteers were among the highest-paid athletes in the empire, some earning fortunes greater than senators through winnings and sponsorships. The races themselves were brutal, with tight turns around the spina causing crashes that sent men and horses flying in clouds of dust and splintered wood. Death was common, but so was glory, and champions were immortalized in graffiti, poems, and statues. The roar of the crowd in the circus could be heard across the city, a thunder that shook the hills of Rome. For Trajan and other emperors before him, these games were a political instrument as vital as the army. By providing food and spectacle, the state maintained public order in a city that depended entirely on imperial supply lines. Another one of his achievements was Trajan's Forum, the largest, most ambitious, and most expensive public complex ever built in Rome, completed in 112 AD and designed by the architect Apollodorus of Damascus. It was constructed using the immense wealth seized from the Dacian Wars, turning military victory directly into architecture. The Forum opened with a vast open plaza paved in marble and surrounded by colonnades, large enough to hold thousands of people at once. The scale alone surpassed all previous forums, making the older ones feel small by comparison. At the far end of the plaza rose the Basilica Ulpia, the largest basilica Rome had ever seen. This enormous building was used for legal cases, business transactions, and public administration. Behind the basilica stood 2 libraries, one for Latin texts and one for Greek, symbolizing Rome's claim to be heir to both cultures. Between them rose Trajan's Column, marking the exact height of the hill that had been cut away to build the Forum. Yet even as Trajan's Forum displayed the empire's mastery over stone, space, and administration, Rome's greatest symbol of divine authority still towered above all from the Capitoline Hill. There stood the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the most sacred sanctuary in the Roman world, visible from nearly every part of the city. This was not merely a temple, but the spiritual heart of Rome, dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, the gods who were believed to protect the state itself. Every triumph ended here, with victorious generals climbing the hill to offer sacrifices in thanks for divine favor. To rule Rome without Jupiter's blessing was unthinkable. From the sacred heights of the Capitol line, the life of Rome flowed back down into the daily rhythm of its people, and nowhere was this more visible than in the great public baths built for all citizens. The Baths of Trajan, completed in 109 AD, rose on the Appian Hill atop the ruins of Nero's Golden House, transforming a symbol of imperial excess into a monument of public benefit. The complex covered an enormous area filled with gardens, libraries, lecture halls, and exercise courts surrounding the bathing chambers. Thousands of Romans passed through its gates each day, from senators to laborers, all equal once they entered. Inside, the baths unfolded in a carefully planned sequence of spaces, moving from cold to warm to hot, guiding the body through cleansing and relaxation. The frigidarium, with its massive vaulted ceilings, echoed with voices and splashing water, while the tepidarium prepared bathers for the intense heat of the caldarium, where steam rose from marble floors. Roman baths worked with water heated by massive underground furnaces using the Hipparcos system, which circulated hot air beneath floors and inside walls to warm rooms and pools. Fresh water flowed constantly from aqueducts, while drains removed used water, allowing the baths to operate continuously throughout the day. By 113 AD, Rome was supplied by 11 aqueducts, delivering hundreds of millions of liters of water every day to fountains, baths, latrines, and private homes. They were built with precise gradients, stone channels, and towering arcades that crossed valleys and plains for dozens of kilometers. These aqueducts made possible Rome's enormous population, its public baths, and its constant flow of clean water, unmatched by any other ancient civilization. In the 2nd century AD, slaves formed the invisible foundation of Rome's daily life, making up an estimated 20 to 30% of the city's population and an even higher percentage in elite households. They worked everywhere, performing tasks that kept the empire functioning. Some slaves lived lives of brutal labor in quarries and galleys, while others, especially educated Greek slaves, served as tutors, accountants, doctors, and secretaries. A slave could be more educated than his master, yet legally owned like property, bought and sold in markets across the city. Roman society depended on this contradiction. Slaves in Rome were not all treated the same, and their fate depended entirely on their owner. Household slaves could live relatively stable lives, receiving food, shelter, and sometimes wages or gifts. Masters were legally allowed to punish slaves physically, including whipping, chaining, branding, and forcing them into hard labor. Slaves could be sold, rented, separated from family members, or sent to mines or gladiator schools at the owner's discretion. In extreme cases, owners could even execute slaves, though by Trajan's time this was increasingly discouraged and socially criticized. The average Roman lived a life far removed from the marble halls of emperors and senators, yet deeply connected to the machinery of the empire. Most people in the city of Rome were artisans, laborers, shopkeepers, porters, or small traders who worked long days to survive in a crowded and noisy metropolis. They lived in insulae, tall apartment buildings made of brick and wood, often rising 5 or 6 stories high, where the poorest families occupied the upper floors, and the better off lived closer to the street. These buildings were cramped, dark, and dangerous, frequently collapsing or catching fire, and most apartments had no running water or toilets. Bread and games were their greatest joy, as these spectacles were funded by the state or wealthy patrons, reinforcing loyalty to Rome and its rulers. The richest Romans lived in a world of extreme luxury that few modern people could fully imagine, centered in vast domes on the Palatine, Aventine, and other elite hills. These houses were filled with marble floors, painted walls, indoor gardens, fountains, libraries, and private bath suites, all maintained by dozens or even hundreds of slaves. Wealthy Romans ate reclining on couches in dining rooms called triclinia, served multiple courses of exotic food such as flamingo tongues, dormice, oysters, peacock, and fish sauces imported from the ends of the empire. Silver tableware, glass from Syria, and spices from India were common among the elite, turning every dinner into a display of status. Banquets could last for hours and were as much political theater as pleasure. Guests were expected to admire the host's wealth, art, and generosity, while poets, musicians, and entertainers performed between courses. Some elite Romans did overindulge to extreme levels, and self-induced vomiting during banquets is mentioned in ancient sources, but it was not a normal or respectable practice, even in Trajan's time. Above the houses of the wealthy, overlooking the city like a throne of stone, stood the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill, where emperors such as Trajan resided when in Rome. The complex was not a single building but a vast network of halls, courtyards, gardens, temples, and administrative chambers expanded by successive emperors since Augustus. Here, the ruler of the known world slept, worked, judged, and received ambassadors beneath painted ceilings and marble colonnades. Protecting the emperor and the palace were the Praetorian Guard, the most powerful and feared soldiers in Rome, stationed close enough to the Palatine to reach the imperial residence within moments. Originally created as an elite bodyguard, they had evolved by the 2nd century AD into a political force that could make or break emperors. Numbering around 9,000 men, divided into cohorts, they were better paid than ordinary legionaries and served shorter terms, making the position highly desirable. Their loyalty, however, was not to Rome itself, but to the man who controlled their favor. The Praetorians guarded the palace, escorted the emperor in public, and secured the city during times of unrest. They lived in the Castra Praetoria, a massive fortified camp just outside the city walls, ready to move at a moment's notice. Though meant to protect the ruler, their proximity to power made them dangerous, and history had already shown they could turn against emperors who lost their support. By Trajan's reign, they were carefully controlled and kept busy to prevent intrigue. Yet Trajan himself rarely lingered within the safety of the palace walls, for he was an emperor shaped more by the camp than by the court. Born in Italica in Hispania, he was the first Roman emperor from the provinces, and he carried the habits of a soldier throughout his life. He spent much of his reign traveling with the legions, inspecting borders, leading campaigns, and strengthening defenses. Even after becoming emperor, he ate simply, marched with his men, and shared their hardships, earning deep loyalty from the army. Trajan's life was defined by action rather than ceremony. He led 2 massive campaigns against Dacia, personally overseeing sieges, road building, and river crossings. After victory, he did not retreat into luxury, but turned his attention to administration, justice, and public works. He toured provinces from the Rhine to the east, listening to local grievances and rewarding loyalty with building projects. In Rome, his time was limited but purposeful. He presided over the Senate with respect, expanded public welfare, and used the wealth of conquest to rebuild the city for the people. In 113 AD, Rome saw Trajan for the last time. After years of building, reforming, and reshaping the city, the emperor departed to the east, drawn once more to the frontiers that had defined his life. He crossed the Euphrates with the full weight of his legions, shattered the Parthian defenses, and pushed farther east than any Roman emperor before him, capturing Ctesiphon and reaching the Persian Gulf. For a brief moment, the Roman Empire stood at its greatest territorial extent, its banners flying over lands never meant to be held. But the victories came at a cost, and rebellion, exhaustion, and illness followed the army on its long return. In 117 AD, far from Rome, Trajan died in Cilicia, leaving the empire at the peak of its glory.